Welcome to the Mystery Track here at ConTinual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we are talking about holiday mysteries, or why every holiday is better with a murder. So before we jump into that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Tamsin.
Holidays are better with murder. That's good. Hi, I'm Tamsin Silver, and I'm an author with False Death Books. I write both urban fantasy and historical fantasy. The book I guess we might focus on that takes place during a holiday for me would be the Mark of the Necromancer book. I am sold out. So I have a card I can kind of show. There you go. It definitely revolves around Christmas time.
Okay, Bobby.
Hi, I'm Bobby Nash. I write a lot of different genres, but I do a lot of crime fiction and mystery stuff. Some of which does end up being around holidays, because I figure when you get that much family together, if murder doesn't happen, it's certainly considered.
You get the extended family together, someone's going down.
Yeah.
Donald.
I'm Donald J. Bingle, and my books tend to be more thrillers than mysteries, although not very seasonal. NaNoWriMo participants might like Frame Shop, which is about murder in a suburban writers group. And in terms of seasonal items, I do have a series of critiques of Christmas Carol classics, one of which is a mystery. Grandma gets run over by a reindeer, although you know pretty much who did it right up front.
Yeah. Well, the ones behind you look like they have snow, or maybe that's rain. So, you know.
Yeah, that's no, that's rain. That's water, or things exploding, or electrical energy going off. No snow. Well, a little fallout, maybe.
Okay. Okay. Jean, how about you?
Well, I like to put my mystery books near a holiday. Every single Piper book is sitting right around a holiday. And the first one, the dead of winter, comes right after Christmas, and the slayings are linked, of course, to Christmas. I agree with you. Holidays are better when you throw in some murder.
That's right. And I'm Gail Z. Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy and urban fantasy and some other stuff. And as Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. And I've got a number of books where they are chasing down a mystery at Christmas time, or they are dealing with some kind of paranormal activity. And of course, that always involves a mystery as well. So we alluded to this a little bit with the, you know, you get that much extended family in one place, somebody's going to die. But what is it that's so compelling about a murder mystery over what's supposed to be the happiest time of the year? Bobby?
Well, I think we all get that frustration when we get that many people together, you know, and most of us we get that frustration, and that's the end of it. And I think in the pages of a book or a movie, watching someone else being murdered and having someone else trying to solve that is a bit of escapism, but it's also a bit of that, oh, if only I could, but yeah, I think it's just a nice escape. I think we like solving mysteries, or seeing if we can, I know certainly growing up, my big thing was, man, I felt really smart if I could figure it out before the answer was given to me. And so as a writer, I try to do that as well. I want to put the clues. I like to play fair. If there's a clue that's going to lead to the unveiling or the capture or the stopping or whatever, I want it to be in there. I hate getting to the end of a book and the protagonist pulls out a clue that was nowhere in the book for me as a reader to see. And so I want to make sure I do that. So I like to play fair so that the people reading can kind of have that aha moment when they figure it out, or the, how did I miss that, when I say who it is and they missed it. And so sometimes that's good for going back and checking it again. And so, yeah, I think it's just we enjoy that escapism of getting lost in it.
Okay.
And it's better than going to jail for really killing somebody.
This is true. That does kind of harsh the holiday mellow.
Yeah.
How about you, Donald?
Well, I think it's the juxtaposition of something dark against all of the brightness that is kind of forced upon you. I mean, you get happy commercials and happy holidays and everything is supposed to be bright and happy. And, you know, so having some contrast to that helps. You know, it's why Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Not only is it set at Christmas, but it gives you, you know, a little bit of adventure and darkness to set off the saccharine reshowing for the 85th time of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and things like that.
Okay, Jean Rabe?
Well, I think holidays, like especially Christmas, are about family and giving and being kind and coming together. And murders tear all of that apart. And it's like salt and excuse my wounded dog behind me. It's like putting salt in a milkshake. You know, once something that was once sweet is now not palatable, and it causes all sorts of bitterness. And the reader thinks about their own holidays and not only what they're reading about, but the bad. Yeah, it's sort of a, I don't know, an unfortunate thing, but it's an awesome place for murder.
Okay, Tamsin?
Well, Donald stole my primary one. Shame. No, I do. I definitely think that it has a lot to do with that juxtaposition of light and dark, because we always find that so fascinating. I also think that it is such a great visual for readers. So if you are someone who enjoys books that are nice and visual, and you don't want, if you really don't want the reader to have to work too hard, if you choose Christmas New York, boom, everyone knows. You already know. It also creates a really great platform for activities where things happen, or for things that get in the way of things happening. Because there's the parades in New York, there's the tree that goes up, there's the ice skating rinks, there's a lot of things that happen during Christmas in New York and other places that don't happen all year, that give you more opportunity to write scenes in places where things are happening. And you're not just like, so we're on some sort of street corner and now I got to try and explain what's going on. But if you're like, it's a small town in Christmas and it is the day before Christmas Eve, everybody knows exactly what that looks like. And it helps you give a nice visual for what you're wanting to set up. And again, I think that goes along with what Donald was saying. There's that juxtaposition, but it also gives you more opportunity for settings.
I think too, you're right. I think if you also, sometimes you can do visual things with your covers, or with like the blood on snow, you know, is a nice, or a body there in the town gazebo next to the Christmas tree, or stuff like that. Yeah, it's a nice thing that it's that contrast of, or making Santa your villain, you know, or someone in a Santa suit your villain. You know, you've mixed two things together. I think
Bobby, you're right. And I think it's also the temperature, because unless you're down south, Christmas is cold and snowy, and you have to see a scene where it's frigid and the storms can come in. It's a nice setting.
Right, because if I write something here where I live, you know, because I'm in the Atlanta area, yeah, there's not a lot of snow settings. It's but we can play with it. It gets cold, or the ice, you know. Yeah, but
Well, and I think one of the other things is that the Christmas season brings up a lot of the past. You know, sometimes that's a good thing, because people might have happy memories of the past, but not everything that happened in the past is a good thing. And so here you are at a time when everybody is supposed to be dwelling on the past and thinking of memories, and sometimes people can decide that there's some overdue balancing of the scales now that they actually spend some time thinking about it. And perfect opportunity there at the end of the year. Well, Jean gave me the perfect lead into the next question, which is, aside from the holidays, you've got winter. and snow and cold and dark, and sometimes the opposite of the holiday party scene. You've got maybe isolation, snowed in. Let's talk about that as the perfect canvas for a murder. Jean, you want to run with that a little further?
I love setting things in bad weather because it adds an element. While not a villain or a character per se, snow drifts, snowstorms, blizzards, ice storms are all roadblocks to your hero trying to solve the crime or to catch the murderer or to flee from the murderer. The weather just adds a dynamic element to your tale and is also very fun to describe. I hate winter. I dislike snow. I'm terrified of ice. So I love to put them in a book because I can really do something with that.
That makes sense. Tamsin.
I have currently the newest thing I'm going to end up working on. It actually does take place right at Christmas because historically, Christmas and New Year's is when the first murder happened, and it's when the last one happens in the first book. And I got really excited about this because I haven't really done that exactly before. But there's a big, they didn't call it a nor'easter at the time, but they call it a blue something. Anyway, it literally is one of the worst storms Texas ever saw at Christmas in the 1800s. And
Is that the Galveston hurricane? Is that the Galveston hurricane?
It goes through, it's just going through a different area of Texas. I can't remember what it's called now, but it's and that's when the first, I think it starts on, I think it's New Year's Eve. It's the first one, and the very last deaths from this serial killer are at Christmas the following year. And but during the first one, the guy comes in and he's like, "You need to come help me. She's missing." And it is, and of course, there's a blizzard, like the worst Texas has seen. And the guy's like, "I'm not going out there to help you find." And the guy's bleeding. He's like, "I'm not going out there to help you." And so it's definitely part of the reason why no one ever found her in time. And so that's going to be, I was really excited to I was like, oh, the weather gets to be part of the reason. And it does it's not the only reason the guy didn't go out there, and I won't do spoilers, but the weather was a primary part of it, and it plays a lot in that time period. So I think it's something that is interesting for people, especially if they don't live near that either. They like to read about snow because people are like, "Oh, I don't live near snow. Snow's so pretty. I grew up in Michigan. I don't think snow's pretty anymore." Then I lived in New York and I walked in it for 16 years. The fact that we don't get snow here that much makes me really happy. But I love putting it in stories, and I love the beauty of it. And you can also make it gross and grotesque. And I think that's what's kind of neat about it, is it can go either way with snow. The weather, you can take it either direction.
Okay, Bobby.
Yeah, the snow series I do it's a crime thriller series, and the last two books take place one right after the other, and in book 5 happens on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, and in around that time. The weather wasn't as big a factor in the story, although it's obviously it's mentioned, but in book 6, which picks up after the events of it, the main character has gone off he needs time alone to process the loss of what he deals with in the last book. And so he actually goes and rents a cabin up in the mountains where it's January, there's snow, there's ice, there's no other people when he gets into some trouble up there. And so the weather really played a big part, because, you've got the what he's like when he's, in the cabin, still complaining about the cold. Then he ends up outside. Then he ends up in the river, so there's a lot of the cold and the stark, everything's kind of brighter in winter, there's just the feel of how everything's different. And, not only are these real people trying to kill him, but this place he came to for refuge is trying to kill him. So I like playing with the different aspects of that. And yeah, so the weather can be fun.
Okay, Donald.
Well, the weather's kind of a two-edged sword in some of these stories and books. You know, a snowstorm can hide the tracks of the killer. On the other hand, if the weather, you know, if the snow has stopped, now the killer has to deal with leaving tracks that they wouldn't otherwise have to worry about. And you know, the weather can help or hinder, depending on what you want to have happen. And also, the weather can itself be a major obstacle for either the bad or the good guy to overcome in some way. I mean, I've done a number of short stories where whether is isolating or the people have to battle the storm in order to get to the hospital or whatever the case may be. And so that gives you a lot to work with that doesn't look fakey in terms of obstacles to be overcome. You know, people not being able to get cell phone reception only works so many times, but being snowed in so that you can't drive effectively can be pretty effective. And you know, an ice storm can affect cell towers and electricity and everything else like that. So it's a handy way to create obstacles to be overcome.
Okay. Tamsin, I want to come back to something that you said, which was mentioning a little bit about the weather and the police procedures that can be affected by it. And I want to delve into that a little more. The weather as an obstacle for forensics, in whether that is the gathering of clues or the medical side of things. How does the weather, especially extreme cold, meddle with what people are trying to collect as the facts of the case or make it more difficult? Tamsin?
I don't deal with the cold as much as the heat in some of my stuff. One of the things, obviously, in the cold, you don't get, you're dealing with trying to like be out there and take care of and find information, find footprints, and if more snow has fallen, it's gone. There's nothing. You can't find anything. And so I think that makes it difficult, because in the 1800s, there was no real CSI anything. It was, do you see footprints? You know, and so that is definitely one of the problems they have in this new section I'm working on. And because there's no actual CSI, I'm not sure I can really answer that question. I can say, though, if I talk about heat. So in the third book in the Billy the Kid series, The Murder of Cricket Kugler, she has found out in the desert after like a week or so. And she was already crushed as it was, and now she's been laying out in the elements. And so there is no way they can really, the guy claims they don't do an autopsy. First off, he says that they were poor and they really didn't have the money for that. Number one, it was murder. She should have been sent off and it should have been free. But also she's flattened and she has decomposed quite greatly. So doing any kind of thing to see if she was raped or checking for anything, it's almost impossible for them to do. And it gets really frustrating for Billy because they didn't really check on anything. And the weather totally stopped almost anything they could do to see on her, because she had been out so long in the hot desert sun of New Mexico during the spring that they can't get anything from her at all. And so that pretty much, that's why that murder is still unsolved. I really believe that almost has everything to do with it.
Okay. Bobby?
Yeah, I think, you know, the extreme temperatures, I mean, will cause problems. I mean, extreme cold, you know, causes issues with the body, and there can be difficulty in figuring out a positive time of death, you know, because of temperature. Certainly in terms of outside of the body clues, melting snow turns the ground to mud. That washes away footprints, and any other DNA could get easily washed away. Yes, I mean, any of those type of elements that can be out there, it's tough to catch everything sometimes.
Okay,
Yeah,
Donald?
Bobby, you're right.
go ahead.
The biggest thing that affects being to identify when a person died is body temperature,
Mhm.
because the amount of heat a body loses by hour after death and rigor mortis, and extreme cold throws all of that out of whack,
Mhm.
makes it much harder to determine a time of death. Often you have to go with, well, this will sound awful. In cases of extreme cold, you have to go with stomach contents and try to figure out when the man or woman usually ate a
Mhm.
particular meal, breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and try to judge it based on that.
Okay.
Well,
Donald? Yeah, go ahead.
that can give you a time of day, but a night can't necessarily give you a day.
Mhm.
And it's you put a rump roast in your freezer and then you pull it out 3 weeks later. Has it been in 3 weeks and a day, 2 days, 3 days? Well, you can't tell. And yes, forensic science is more precise than my judging what's in my freezer, but it still does complicate everything, like Gene said, liver temperature and things like that. But it can also complicate things in terms of whether a death was intentional or not intentional. I mean, if you've got extreme weather of some type going on, killing somebody can be as simple as putting a puncture in their tire and sending them over a mountain pass that not very many people go across, and oops, now they're stuck in the snow, nobody comes by to help. They can die of natural causes, but it's intentionally caused. You send somebody out over a half-frozen lake, they can fall in. Is that accidental? Is it intentional? The weather gives murderers opportunities to cover their crime just by making it look not like a crime.
I just read something that I think it was Lake Superior remains cold enough all year.
I
Huh?
was just thinking about that. I was like, oh, I should mention that. And then
Yeah. And correct me if I get this wrong, but it stays cold enough all year that bodies don't decompose and float. So pretty much everybody who's ever been dumped in Lake Superior is still down there.
So not a good place to go scuba diving.
It is out.
It's plenty big and it's plenty deep. You won't run into them.
I was
Well,
gonna say it's deep, but it still just sounds like a horrible idea.
Mm.
There's a Lake Placid. I don't know what happened there. Lake Placid in New York is pretty far up toward the Canadian border. And there was a long unsolved crime there about a wealthy woman who disappeared. And two scuba divers, it's a very deep natural lake and it stays very cold. And two scuba divers actually found her remarkably well-preserved remains. And this was after about at least 50 years, because whoever put the anchor around her neck and dropped her over didn't realize that there was a ledge, a natural ledge. And instead of going all the way to the bottom of the glacial lake, she landed on the ledge and they found her and proved that it was at least not natural causes. So I thought that was kind of an
You
interesting
guys are
twist.
giving
Yeah, you
me
just can't put
all
that.
sorts of
You
ideas.
just can't put that around your neck by yourself these days.
Yeah.
It's harder.
It's hard.
So
I don't know.
Go ahead.
I don't know if any of you have ever been thrown into cold water, really cold water. It is also quite a shock to the system, and can right there cause a heart attack. But life expectancy, when you fall into cold water in the winter, is not high, and is often very badly portrayed in movies. People get out of the water and they're able to walk and function and assist other people, and it's like, no,
Yeah. They just go, "Ooh," and they're
doesn't
good.
work that way.
Right?
You're pretty incoherent and pretty incapable of doing anything with any precision very quickly.
Yeah, it's really just a matter of a few minutes, depending on the temperature of the water.
Yep.
Yeah. And that
So-
shock to your system can throw you so out of whack that even if you're not like badly damaged, you're out of it. that it's such a shock to your system that you can't make your limbs do what you want them to, or make words come out right, or whatever.
And we have the Zoom cat.
I'm so sorry. She never does this. She wanted up on my face.
She wants in on the meeting.
What are you doing?
So what are some of your favorite mystery tropes, whether or not they're holiday related? Of course, then again, a good trope can be made to be holiday related if you really want to, but what are some of your favorite mystery tropes?
I got one.
Yeah, go ahead, Jean.
You know, my first mystery was inspired because a friend of mine, a teacher, would write me Christmas cards and only sign his name. Nothing else, just his name. And so I thought, you know, Christmas cards. I am going to peg a mystery, murder mystery, all along Christmas cards. And I posed the victim like the cover of the card that he sent to the murderer. Like one I stuffed up a chimney with his boots hanging down. Another one I buried in a snowman. Another one I put in a rocker in front of the Christmas tree. And they matched pretty much the card. So I just thought Christmas cards, you know, is a good trope. Let's slay them that way. Oh yeah, yeah. And I put one in the sleigh. That was the first one.
That's a pretty awesome idea, actually. I like that. Yeah. I should be writing them. I'm
afraid to send Christmas cards to Jean anymore.
Okay. Like off my.
You should be too.
Yeah, I like playing with the trope of where the killer kind of gets fascinated by the person trying to solve the mystery, and it becomes a game. I've done that a couple of times where, you know, the killer is just like, finally someone on my level I can play against. And then it becomes not just killing, but a game or a competition between the two. And I kind of like playing with that and seeing, you know, you can't do it all the time because then it becomes kind of silly, but having those moments where you kind of get into the psyche of the villain, of why they need someone that's like, he's like, you know, I'm doing this and I'm getting away with it, but now I've got somebody that might actually stop me. And that just makes it more exciting because they have to up their game a little.
It's almost that Sherlock Moriarty thing where, wow, yeah. I've got an equal here. Let's see how equal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because now I've got somebody I can beat. I've got to beat this person.
Yeah. Donald, favorite tropes?
You know, I find legal procedurals to be kind of interesting. They don't always get the forensics right, especially on television, on procedurals. They make it better than it would be, and don't worry about the cost of it. But, you know, if you watch true crime shows at all, you find a lot of stupid criminals in terms of forensics. They leave their cell phone on, they leave the GPS on in their car, or whatever. And I kind of like the idea of inverting that trope. And one of the things I've been playing with in my mind lately, you know, you've got all these semi-autonomous driving vehicles these days. And, you know, the time is going to come when somebody's going to try and get away with a crime by taking their cell phone, putting it in their car, you know, with a sack of potatoes or a dead raccoon or whatever, and, you know, programming it to drive several hundred miles while they go commit a crime locally. And then they're going to have cell phone data, and they're going to have GPS data that's going to show that they're hundreds of miles away when the crime occurred. And, you know, so playing with the expectations in terms of forensics, you know, in one of my first books, the bad guys are going to do something, and you know, two of them are working on the plan, and the third guy goes on a cross-country tour of hair salons and fast food joints and just piles up a bunch of hair and food wrappers and DNA. So they're going to leave them all over the crime scene. And, you know, odds are there's some criminal that, you know, got a haircut or ate at the fast food place or whatever. And, you know, the cops get there's trash all over the place. And it's, you know, it's all a forensic countermeasure of the bad guys, because they know that DNA will be tested, the hair will be tested, and they're going to get all sorts of false leads.
Interesting. Tamsin?
I think one of my favorite tropes is the cop who is stuck with some new person that they have to deal with on top of trying to solve the crime, and then letting that person actually be the key to helping them figure it out because it's a new perspective. I think that's the reason why the TV show Castle did so well for so long. And it's one of my favorites is the accidental help that happens with someone else, even though it's totally not realistic.
Yeah.
I like the trope. And that's sort of what happens in Mark the Necromancer. She comes into her power, she really has no idea what's going on. And the guy that's with her is an established detective for the NYPD Supernatural Division. And so having her around, he's like, you need to stay over here. And of course she doesn't listen because that's how that trope goes.
And together they fight crime.
And together they fight crime. Yes.
But the whole student teacher kind of thing is just very useful for conveying information and dialogue anyhow. And, one of the things you can do with it is when you've got somebody who's expert in one thing and somebody who's not, well, maybe that other person can be expert, like you were saying, in some other area that ends up being helpful. In that impact, I have two people forced to work together, one who's kind of an old school spy and the other guy who knows about all things internet and computer related. And since the crimes are occurring both in the real world and in the virtual world, they get to teach each other kind of things.
Well, and I love when you have the person that is pegged as being the useless newbie, but they actually have some weird hobby that gives them this esoteric piece of knowledge that normal people don't have and that wouldn't come up for the regular detective. And the guy goes, but have you considered the mating habits of octopus? If you know the mating habits of octopus, well, then you would know. And the main cop's going, who knows the mating habits of octopus? But this guy does, or whatever weird kind of offbeat little segment of knowledge, and that blows the case wide open.
Or they ask that one question that makes everything go ding for the detective, yeah.
Which leads me to ask, what's your favorite kind of detective? Now, Bobby just immediately made me think of Columbo with it. One more question. But there are so many detective archetypes, from the Jessica Fletchers to the Hercule Poirots to the Sherlocks and the Columbos and all the other folks. What's your favorite? Jean?
The old dude, the old cop. Lenny Briscoe on Law and Order became my favorite character because he'd seen everything, covered everything, and yet he had this dogged determination and he wasn't tired of any of it. And if you read Michael Connelly, his Harry Bosch is older and older and is retired. And he's a guy that despite his age and could just hang it all up, he can't let it go. So I like that kind of a character, that the age doesn't matter. It's the drive in his heart and his head.
Right, because like Bosch is doing it, it's not his job anymore, but he's committed to seeing justice done. Yeah.
How about you, Donald?
In a lot of ways, I like the situations where it's not Jessica Fletcher because the murders happen way too often, but it is a true amateur that has to figure it out. That can be kind of exciting because they don't necessarily know everything, but they may know those esoteric things that you were talking about before, and they're just placed in a situation where they're treading water as fast as they can, and they have to figure out this, the murder on their own because help is not arriving. And if they don't figure it out or band together in some way, they're gonna, everybody's gonna be picked off or that kind of thing. But I like them to be smart. I don't like them to be stupid. So those are difficult. Those are difficult mysteries to find, and you certainly don't find them very often in series.
Yeah, I mean, if Jessica Fletcher was an amateur at the beginning, after 10 years of solving weekly murders, first off, there should be nobody left in the state. And secondly, she's now gotten grandfathered in. She should have some sort of honorary degree after all that crime solving.
Or she should be listed as a serial killer, but
I've always suspected that. Bobby?
I'm a big fan. I like the first detectives that I followed were on TV. Guys like Jim Rockford on the Rockford Files, or Thomas Magnum PI. I love the fact that these were guys that were on their own, but they had help from other people, but they would get into these situations where they were not always the expert, but they had to find ways to get out of it. And and it's funny, you're talking about being grandfathered in with Jessica Fletcher. I remember this comedian once, and I don't remember who it was talking about tropes of TV, and it's like there's a show called Quincy where the medical examiner tells them every week it's a murder, and the cops go, no, it's not, and he's like, after 5 years, if I say it's a murder, by God, it's a murder.
Every week for 5 years.
You would think after a while they would start trusting his judgment, but no. But I like those guys who can sometimes get into these cases. It's just their job. They go and then they get in over their head, or the clients are not always who they purport themselves to be, because, Rockford Files, he was always getting hired by people that weren't what they sold themselves as. And so I enjoy those type of characters as well. And, like Tamsin mentioned Castle, I think that's a fun trope to see this amateur, playing detective along with the professionals and doing that. So.
Okay, Tamsin?
Well, some of my first mysteries, other than watching it on Mystery on PBS with my dad, and Agatha Christie, like that was where I started, where I love the idea that it's a group of people trying to figure out something. And of course that creates strife because they're all going to argue and no one's going to get along. And but like the next thing I remember reading was Nancy Drew and watching the Hardy Boys on TV. So I like that team, or that Nancy always had a couple people in her corner, and the Hardy Boys always had each other. I've always really liked that group of people trying to solve the crime together, to be there for each other. That was my first real foray into mystery, and it's still what I enjoy.
Oh yeah, I remember as a kid too, Encyclopedia Brown. He wasn't solving murders, but that was, there's a lot of really good investigative technique in what he did.
And Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I like the couple investigators. So Nick and Nora, or Heart to Heart, or Remington Steele, or you can have the buddy flick version of that, where it's two people who aren't really a couple, but they squabble like an old married couple. So they kind of have that dynamic, and deep down, they still will come save each other's bacon. And that, to me, I really love the repartee. I love the relationship piece of it. And I've just always found well-written versions of that to be very clever. And it's just kind of a level of fun on top of, let's solve this murder as if it were a jigsaw puzzle and we're bored. Well, folks, go ahead.
I was gonna say, those almost too are more character based, where the almost sometimes in those stories, the mystery that they solve is almost secondary to the characters. It's more about building the characters up. And I really like that, like getting to know the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And it's also often set in some sort of social milieu where they're part of a society, whether it's like the 1920s with Nick and Nora, or they're part of some segment of society that maybe an outsider wouldn't be able to penetrate, but because they are from that social group, they can get in and they have access and they know what should and shouldn't be there, where maybe somebody from the outside wouldn't be able to get that kind of access. That's kind of fun too. Because there's usually not only the character, as you say, but also that slice of life or that insight into some subsegment that we don't normally get to see. And so you're sort of, that's always been fun too. Believe it or not, folks, we have blown through our time. So let's go around again, let everybody know what books you have out, coming, recent, or just wintertime or holiday mysteries, as well as where we can find you online. Bobby?
I'm BobbyNash.com is my website. That links to everything there. Actually, I have several books that are bouncing out all at the same time, which is always fun. I just had the Hunter Houston and the Molten Menace come out from Falstaff Books, which is a comedy horror spinoff of the Bubba series. Last week, as we're recording this, the second book featuring Sheriff Tom Myers in the small fictional town of Summersville, which is that's book one there, In the Wind. The second book, Such a Night, just came out last week. The sixth snow book will be out in December. It's called Snow Down. And in late January, early February, Evil Intent, the sequel to my first novel, Evil Ways, will come out. So busy time.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot. Congrats,
Yeah,
Donald.
thank you.
Well, I've got the spy thriller series that you can see behind me. Flash Drive came out this year. In terms of seasonal things, the Christmas Carol Critique Collection, there's 4 separate ones, or you can get the collection that has all 4 of them on Amazon. They're Kindle Unlimited, so you don't even have to pay anything for them if you're a Kindle Unlimited member. I mentioned before, Frame Shop is my murder mystery set in the suburban writer's guild. It's got a little over-the-top ersatz violence at the beginning and a bunch of different writing styles because it's a writing group and they do readings for each other and talk about each other's stories, including critiquing a terrible, terrible cat mystery that I wrote. And actually got published somewhere long before I ever did this book, but it's a terrible cat mystery and they explain exactly why.
Okay, Jean?
Well, Don and I just had the Love Hate Case Files book 1 and 2 come out earlier this fall. And there is a Christmas tale or a tale set around Christmas in it. And I also write the Piper Blackwell mystery series, which is The Dead of Something. And I have a new one coming out early next year.
Very nice. Where can we find you online?
JeanRabe.com.
Okay. And Tamsin?
You can find me at tamsinsilver.com, and there's links to everything from me there. As far as books that take place during the holidays, I mentioned Mark the Necromancer has some of the story, some of the important parts of the story that happened definitely during Christmas Eve. And then as far as new stuff coming out, I just got edits back on book 3 of the Billy the Kid series. And so we are shooting, get that out early in 2022. So I'm super excited. That is called The Murder of Cricket Kugler.
Very cool. I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com and morganbryce.com. Social media is a variation of either of those names. Most recently, we've had Blink come out, which is the second in the Treasure Trail series written under the Morgan Bryce name, and that has mafia ghosts and haunted theaters and witches and several murders. And then Legacy, which is the 6th in the Deadly Curiosities series, just came out. And that has pirate ghosts and curses and soul bonds and blood magic and voodoo and, oh yeah, dead bodies. So lots going on there. But usually you can find me here at ConTinual. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for being wonderful panelists. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more mystery coming up on ConTinual. So we'll see you online.